Hello, and thank you for logging on to the Foundation for Physician Advancement podcast channel in partnership with Convey Med. FPA is a nonprofit built for and run by Marney Reid and a group of dedicated physician educators. Our mission is to help physicians build a successful practice in today's healthcare setting through the development of your leadership skills and business acumen. I'm Marney Reid, Executive Director, and we hope you enjoy today's discussion. Hello, and welcome to the third of our four-part podcast series on private equity and orthopedics. As always, I first want to thank our tremendous faculty and panelists for your candor and willingness to lean into this topic. Before we get started, could you please introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Hi, everybody. Marney, thank you so much for having us. This is Dana Jacoby. I'm the founder and CEO of Vector Medical Group, and Vector was really created to help physicians architect their futures. We started with, I had done medical market research all over the world for some of the largest companies in healthcare, GE and J&J and Allergan, and then had the luxury of selling a business to a private equity and realized at that time that the mission for Vector and for myself was to really help doctors architect their futures. So that was a lot of deals ago, but I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm excited to partner with the physicians on this call to help educate other people in their specialty about what they should be thinking about moving forward.
Thanks so much. And I'm Mike Ast. I'm a joint replacement surgeon up at HSS in New York City, where I also serve as our Chief Medical Innovation Officer, as well as the president of our Ambulatory Surgery Center Development Network. And just super happy to be here because I think this is a really important topic for us and our colleagues.
Thanks, Marty, for putting this together. My name is Chad Krueger. I'm a hip and knee replacement surgeon at the Rothman Institute in Philadelphia. Having done a lot of work on health policy and research in that regard, private equity certainly falls into that scope, and I'm excited to talk about that tonight with everyone on this recording.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bryan Springer. I'm a hip and knee surgeon in Charlotte, North Carolina at Ortho Carolina. Excited to be on the call. Our group does not have any specific affiliation with private equity, although we have had serious conversations. And I also serve as our fellowship director. And much of our interest or questions that we get from this is actually our fellows going out into the marketplace looking for jobs. So excited to listen, learn, and share some experiences around private equity.
Hey, my name is Gary Stewart. Thank you for letting me join on this panel. I'm a foot and ankle specialist with Resurgence Orthopedics in Atlanta. I am currently the South Region Clinical Governance Board member, director of our Resurgence Foot and Ankle Center, and co-chair of our Resurgence Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I believe I'm on because we just did a deal about a year ago with Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe, and I hope to be able to add some insight to this topic.
For those of you who've listened to the first two podcasts, you may be wondering, what are Doctors Ast, Krueger, and Springer doing talking about private equity, all of whom are top name academics not currently affiliated with a private equity sponsor? Well, who else better to help us understand and lead the discussion on what to know, what to avoid, and who the good players are than the academic community? They're progressive thought leaders in research and education in their specialty and best positioned to help the future generation of surgeons who will be much more immersed in these kind of partnerships. Dr. Springer, coming to you first. You and I have had several discussions about private equity when I first started consulting for a PE-backed platform. Mm-hmm. And one of your greatest concerns was for your current and previous trainees. Can you talk to me a little bit about these conversations and how often are you getting calls?
Sure. Thanks, Marty. And you're right. It might seem a little odd at first to say, what are, academic surgeons doing having these discussions? And I might preface that by saying, I don't think academic surgeons are immune to this by any means, right? I mean, I think we see surgeons that are in academic centers that are, purely academic practices, that we see cases of groups within those academic centers wanted to be extracted from those arrangements that maybe weren't all that they were cracked up to be. So we see factions of academic, practices looking to do PE models. I suspect we may even at some point see academic centers themselves looking at doing this. I know myself and Chad and Mike on the phone. Of course, Gary's always been through this. Are kind of in these academic private practice models. We've gone through that due diligence period with private equity. And I think, to emphasize, and Dana said this before, it wasn't right for us at the time. It doesn't mean it won't ever be right for us. And I think we always keep our eye on it, but it wasn't right for us at the time. And that may be different for different groups. But you're exactly right. So dealing with residents, dealing with fellows, in particular, the fellows coming into fellowship, and they're starting to look at jobs, academic and private. And I would say, I take three of our four fellows this year going into private practice. Every single one of them going into groups that were either just gone through a PE deal or considering going through a PE deal. And the question that they ask is, what does this mean for me? Because I think historically, most people have thought of private equity as being great for the older partners and great for those, kind of in the twilights of their career. They get a big payout and they ride into the sunset. And where does that leave our younger partners and people joining in? And we've seen that in other specialties where the deals just haven't been great. But I think it's changed. And, important to emphasize there's good deals and there are bad deals. But I think Gary mentioned this on the previous podcast, is that, how do you protect the younger generation? They're really the ones that are driving this. What's the equity stake or the equity claim in these deals for them if, say, they just miss that first, scrape or that first bite of the apple, and that second bite maybe 5 to 7 years down the line? What does that mean for them? So, we're continually getting these questions from everybody that's looking at jobs.
Well, and Bryan, I think you bring up a good point. I think one of the things I tell the fellows is, no matter where you're going, because like we mentioned in previous podcasts, I think every private equity deal is very different and specific, but you certainly want to go to a place that you feel valued, right? And I would say any good deal for a practice is going to value the younger surgeon, so whether that's private equity or some other setup. And that should be very clearly put out to you and demonstrated by discussions that you have with the group or the private equity firm or both. Certainly the deals where it's really just good for a subset, maybe the older surgeons of the group, that's probably not a great place for you to be. And you should be able to get a pretty clear picture of that to make it worth your time to join a group that's either just recently sold or maybe doing so in the future. Like you said, it's hard with the details and so forth. We do get these questions all the time. Yeah. But the bottom line is, any good group is going to value the younger generation, because without that younger generation, there is no group in the future. And that doesn't really behoove anyone who's investing in that organization.
Yeah, such a great point.
I think one of the hardest positions to be in is really when you're looking for a job and you don't even know if that practice is in that conversation, right? Because there's not a lot of practices out there advertising, yes, we're currently talking to 3 private equity groups. Now, you may be able to ask, you may not get an honest answer, not because the people aren't being honest, but because they're not at a point in the deal that they can really start to talk about it out loud or in public forums. And I think it's a really challenging time to be going into practice. Most of us are several years out into practice now, but making the decisions now can be really challenging. And I just think it's important, if you are in training, if you're a chief resident or a fellow and you're looking for jobs, to talk to people, to ask around, to talk to your colleagues, friends, talk to your mentors like Chad, like Bryan, like Gary, who are out there really with an understanding of this world, and also probably with an ear to the ground, who have a sense of what's happening in certain local markets or certain regions, or where there's a bigger influence of third-party capital coming in or hospital systems taking over, and how the sort of landscape looks for private practices in that area in general, because you can pick up a lot of information that way, even if you don't get to learn the details of the exact deal where you might be going.
And lastly, I just want to point out, like, just because a group just sold to private equity doesn't mean it's a bad job. And I think that really, for some reason that kind of is how it's portrayed to, I think, many residents and graduating fellows as well. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, at the end of the day, you're either an employee or you own part of the company in some way as a partner or some other fashion. And when you're coming out of training, you're going to be an employee no matter where you are. and you want to find a job that works for you and your family and so forth. But just because a group that you like, that's in the perfect location for you and your family, that has the practice style that you're looking for, and everything else lines up, just got bought by PE, doesn't mean that it's a bad job for you presently or in the future.
I'll tell you, it really makes me feel great to hear industry leaders like yourselves talking about this and bringing it to the forefront and bringing it to your trainees, because it seemed like for a long period of time, and it was one of the reasons why I was a hard no, was that a lot of the fellowship directors and a lot of the chairpersons of programs just would hear PE and say no. And my point would say that exactly as Dr. Krueger has said, it doesn't necessarily mean because a practice just did a PE deal or they're going to do a PE deal that's a bad job. The things that are important for having a good job for yourself are the things that were important 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and even 30 years ago. I know when I came out of fellowship, we were all worried about the partner or group that would offer the $5,000 chair, or when you wanted to buy into the practice, the cost was exorbitant, or the high starting salary, or the hospital that did the physician service agreement, or the practice that just got bought by a hospital, or the JVs. Like, there is always going to be something about the business that you have to make yourself knowledgeable of as you're entering into a job. And for me, I was fortunate enough to be at the one and only practice that I started with in 2006. And so it was important for me to have that practice continue to go into the future. And those are the kind of the pillars of what you should be looking for. Come up with a list of what is important to you and how you want your lifestyle to be. The business of it is important as well, but there has to be a give and take on some of that. And you just have to make sure you do your informational gathering.
So dovetailing from this, that was a phenomenal conversation. I love the dialogue. Dr. Krueger, you mentioned that you don't think having a PE partner is a bad thing when searching for a job. Could you weigh in on your thoughts about PE in the orthopedic space as someone who's very involved in value-based care?
So thanks for the question, Marnie. And you're right. I mean, we definitely had, we being Rothman, I wasn't here at the time, obviously. It wasn't a good experience based on everything I've heard. And I think that's for multiple reasons. But I look at private equity just like some other, some other idea that the business would try and then fail, right? I mean, unfortunately, when you're running businesses, it's like anything else. You're going to go through some innovation cycles, and some are going to be great, and they're going to work very well for you, right? And Rothman's done very well in some aspects of that throughout the years. Others, are going to do poorly, and you think it's a great idea at the time. You invest a lot of money into it, and then it flops, right? And that's not just within orthopedic surgery, that's any business. And I think, private equity are kind of the same way. I mean, you could think you're doing everything properly and think you have a great agreement, and it may not work think about all the practices, and not just practices, but businesses that thought they were doing something amazing, and then COVID happened, right? Like, you can't predict some things in life. And this is going to be an experience that is going to work out well for you, or it may not work out as well as you'd like it to, but you can't predict that. So I guess that's a long way of saying I don't harbor any negative feelings towards private equity. I think done well and for the right reasons, and getting the whole group on board and making sure that everyone feels like they're getting an equal share of whatever the deal is a very challenging task to accomplish, especially when you have a very large group. But if you do that and everyone's happy, go for it. That being said, it's not right for everyone. And some surgeons, may have very strong feelings that it's not right for anyone. But I can't say I'm in that camp. I try to look at the pluses and minuses and make a determination, like Bryan said, about where you're at a certain time to see if it's right.
And you know what it is? It's that not every deal is going to be the same. And even in the current iteration of private equity's entrance into orthopedics, there are going to be some deals that work and some deals that don't. And they won't necessarily be the fault of either of the parties. Just because a private equity deal doesn't work out and either the third party capital partner or the practice partner decides to back out, doesn't mean like, oh my gosh, they're a bad practice, or oh my gosh, they're a bad partner. I think sometimes, you read the market and the market reads a bit incorrect. Sometimes some other behemoth like the local payer and or the local healthcare system and or Amazon comes in and totally disrupts what you're trying to do or what you were using as your model to predict how things were going to go. I've worked again, I work a lot in the world of innovation, so we deal with a lot of private equity money who come in to make deals with us in terms of bringing innovations or bringing new business lines to market. We recently partnered with 2 big private equity firms in order to launch our nationwide virtual physical therapy platform. And that was an interesting idea because that idea might totally fail. And when we said that out loud, the private equity partner was like, yeah, that's fine. Some of these things fail. It's no big deal. And we in orthopedics, because in medicine, we think failure is the worst thing that could ever happen ever, because in our training, we equate failure with people dying. These deals might work and they might not. And if they fail, everyone will probably be okay on the other end, much like the world-renowned Rothman Institute had a deal that wasn't great, 30 years ago, and they still remain one of the world's leaders in orthopedic care. Just don't tell anyone at HSS I said that, right? But because businesses will move on and we are in the best field and we do take good care of patients, and because we take good care of patients, we will continue to take good care of patients. You just need to think, is private equity, is what they're offering me today, the capital opportunity, the growth opportunity, the efficiency opportunities, the expansion opportunities, is this what my practice needs right now? And if it does, is this the partner that shares my values, as Gary alluded to earlier, that's going to allow me to keep my practice culture the way I want and allow us to grow in a way that we can. And if you find that partner in your situation that works, I think that's great. If you do a deal and it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. And I think when our trainees and our next generation of surgeons come out, they'll probably realize that they're like, oh, that's a private equity backed or partner group. Great. That's a non-private equity backed group. Great. And they'll look at it for the true opportunity that it is, where it is, how does it work with my family? How does it work with my career goals? How does it work with my work-life balance and my future growth potential? How does it work with my desire to teach, to do research, to do innovation, whatever it is? We will learn to look at these things just like now we look at employed positions and private positions and hospital employed positions, and we think of them less dichotomously than we used to. I think a PE partner group will be just another one of those entities that it's going to come down to the details of each individual deal, and it won't be looked at so much as this completely unique and separate and potentially evil sort of third group. So coming back to the original sentiments from Dr. Springer, I would love to hear from Dana and Dr. Stewart, as academics who are training these surgeons, who are getting these calls and who are really trying, to soothe down the fear, but also arm them, right, with proper education. Dana first, coming from the more, business aspect of it, and then Dr. Stewart, what are the 2 to 3 things that you feel each academic surgeon should be able to respond to their surgeons when they get these calls?
So the one thing that isn't talked about as much as I think needs to be in a lot of these discussions is the culture and the leadership of what you're buying into or what you're joining. And I think that is something that can't always be measured, but it can be felt, and you definitely know when you don't have it. And so, for physicians that are in academia or physicians that are coming out into practice, they really need to be mindful of don't be nervous to ask the hard questions. And I think back to the earlier discussion, there's just been a lot of shift. We went from 59% of doctors being employed by a hospital, health system, or private equity pre-COVID to now that number ticking up above 75%. So, it behooves all the younger doctors, or if you're getting a question from a younger doctor about these types of things, just to be able to really address them head on. Because to your point, it's the fear and the lack of education that I feel like really creates this kind of this churn of what is this private equity stuff, or how do I address it, versus getting educated and just addressing it head on and saying exactly what we've talked about on this call. So I think those are the biggest things. I think above and beyond that, getting educated on the terminology or how these deals actually work just make a lot of sense, so that there's not, you see it more as a case like you would in the OR versus something that is kind of out in the ether that you don't understand. So I think really taking the time to understand the process behind a lot of these deals and why they're happening makes a whole lot of sense in educating younger partners for the future.
Well, I'll tell you, Dana, you hit it right on the head. All of those things are very important. And I think just to add a little bit of a perspective as a physician that has gone through this and does have mentees and mentors and residents as well, you should make sure you understand how that PE partner is interacting with the practice, how they intend to interact with you and your career, because it is a relationship. And one of the most important relationships you're going to have is that PE partner through an MSO. Is it directly to you? How do they recognize and maintain clinical autonomy? How are you, as the person going into the group, going to be compensated? Is there going to be a way for you to have an equity stake? And again, treat it just like Dana said. It's just another thing to learn more about, just like an OR case. Doctors are naturally inquisitive, and this is one of the more important things that you're going to do in your career, and just educate yourself on it. But those would be 2 or 3 of the things that I think are important when you're dealing with a practice that has a PE partner. Also, who is the driver, and what are the goals of the partnership?
Very, very sage advice. Would love to come back to Doctors Krueger and Springer, as 2 people very involved in various societies, whether it's, AAOS overall or AUKUS or, some of the regional societies or smaller niche societies. What do you feel like we could or should see more of? Because it feels like, to the point made earlier, PE's kind of been like the dirty, thing that we don't talk about, but it's here, right? What do you feel like we could or should see in the future to bring more education, whether it's, hey, it's not for everyone, but if it is for you, here are the things you should ask. What should we start seeing from the societies?
Yeah, I think to Mike's point earlier, it's just a matter of time before this is just part of the normal process, that it's just kind of accepted in the normal vernacular of when we talk about going out and looking at jobs and looking at opportunities, if it's not already. But I think the societies have a big role in this. I think AOS and AUKUS and maybe have historically been a little bit gun shy about taking positions on this, but I think it's to the point now where it really can't be ignored. So we have obviously we see this huge interest in organization, Foundation for Physician Advancement, and how much interest the PE panels and things gain there. We're seeing it through other common at meetings, having private equity panels that Dana and Gary have been huge parts of. But I think if the true function of societies, AUKUS, AOS is physician first and is geared towards education, then this should be a big part of it. And I suspect probably what we'll see is it'll start to filter down into parts of fellowship training, parts of residency training, and I think you could even argue, med school training, where the way we educate physicians in med school now is the same way we did it 50 years ago, relying on rote memorization when you have everything at your fingertips. And maybe we need to change that focus. Yeah. And maybe we need to change that focus a little bit and give people a little bit more of a business slant, and not so much think that medicine and business have to be in separate rooms and they can't intermingle, which is, I think, the way that it's historically been approached.
Well, to the point you made in the February FPA course, if you're not ordering off the menu, you're probably on it.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what Bryan said. I mean, at the end of the day, societies of any size are made up of members. And I think as more members gain exposure to private equity, the societies are going to reflect that. And there's probably a lot more we could do to prepare people, or educate people, I should say, through multiple different organizations and different societal initiatives on private equity. I think the downside is it kind of private equity got a bad rap for whatever reason, based on things that happened, maybe a generation ago. But I mean, if you look at where it was even 10 years ago compared to what the landscape like it's now, I mean, it's drastically different. I just think in medicine, it takes a little bit of time for some of that stuff to trickle down through. especially at some of the more rigid organizations. If that's not what the leaders have necessarily thought was important, that wouldn't necessarily trickle down to the membership. But I do think that's certainly going to happen. And it's hard to, box it in. But like Bryan said, I mean, this is certainly going to be the future and something people care about. I absolutely agree that, the mixing of business and medicine, that is our future, right? I mean, even look at like the bundled care pathways and value-based medicine stuff. I mean, we are mixing business with medicine. Private equity is another way to do that. But we have to be able to educate our future leaders on these topics and so they can understand kind of what they're getting into, because that's also how a lot of patient care pathways are going to be developed and really analyzed going forward.
That's a great point. Well, I am very sad to have to bring a close to this episode. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. We're going to continue. I'm pretty sure the editors would not be happy with that, as is the people who are probably listening to this either during long turnover times or driving between clinic or whatnot. Dana, Doctors Ast, Krueger, Springer, and Stewart, thank you for this discussion and the previous two. In our next and final episode on this series, we're going to sit down with two other thought leaders, both in orthopedics and private equity spaces, and hear about their experience and why they decided to actually take leadership roles in their PE-backed platform. Please check out the show notes, especially as we are providing Dana's secret sauce of, what to expect during, the deal flow process. Have a great evening, everyone, and we'll look forward to the next podcast. Thank you again for listening in. We hope you enjoyed the discussion with our FPA faculty. If you'd like to learn more about our mission or upcoming events, please visit our website at www.buildingasuccessfulpractice.org.